been doing this for several years now, so, and I'm just looking over at who all is participating. So I'm not really certain of what kind of experience you have or if you're how familiar you are, but I want you to just feel free to ask any questions because as long as I've been doing this, I am still learning also. So there's never anything too dumb to ask or think it's a really simple question to ask. So just please feel free. So this is my, let's see. There we go. Let me see. This is the agenda that I have. We're going to do, can everybody see this okay? If you can't see it or something, just holler and let us know. But I'm just going to do a really, really quick, brief Brownfields introduction on what a Brownfields is and what a phase one is, and the updated ASTM E152721 revised standards. They were released in November. I personally do not have a copy of that yet. I've ordered and I have not received them. So I'm just going by what I've heard through different webinars on what changes and revisions have been made to the new standards. Then we will talk about who could conduct a phase one and then how the phase one ties in to the brownfields. And we'll talk about the different components. And of course, we'll have a Q&A. And then depending on the time, we can go over the revisions of the 2721 standards as well. Of course, it's just a little bit of the agenda of what I just spoke about. So, spot here. And this is just talks about a little bit of the what is a brownfields and the history of brownfields, the inception in 1995, and how it changed the way contaminated property or potentially contaminated, how it changed, how it's managed and addressed. Where before, like Superfund, it seemed like it was dirty, but brownfields just changed the whole concept and it opened up a lot of opportunities for tribes, states, and small communities. And it also opened up more opportunities for economic development, to bring more jobs and reuse of brownfields properties. And the Brownfields law is what gives the provision for liability of property only if a phase one is conducted on the property. And what that phase one does, it breaks the chain of liability and protection from past contamination. And the Brownfields Utilization Investment and Local Development Act, what they call the BUILD Act, it was updated in 2018, and more or less it authorized the EPA's Brownfields program, and it made amendments to the current Brownfields law. And it did, there were a few changes. This is the changes that it's taken directly from the EPA side about the changes that were made to it. And these are the big changes that were made, that they were able to, it changed the ability to change grant dollars in lots of ways. And it made nonprofits eligible for funds. And then it allowed for the administrative cost, and it increased the cleanup amount to 500,000. And you're able to do multi-purpose grants in which you can combine an assessment and a cleanup in one grant. So this is the EPA's definition of a brownfields. Real property, the expansion or development or reuse, which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminants. And we want to consider what is a brownfields just in our everyday world. It's any property that's underutilized, that's just set there, that's abandoned, and properties that may or may not be environmentally contaminated, and properties with potential environmental issues that may be limited the use of the property. And brownfield properties are everywhere. I mean, you could look just around the corner and you will see brownfield properties everywhere. It's just how you use that property to make it towards the brownfields. And this is just some pictures of underutilized properties that was once a vacant field, and then it was later turned into a convenience store, gas station. And this is I think this is the Fort Sill Apache. And this is an abandoned properties. Just because you have an abandoned property or vacant property, it's not a bad thing, because those properties can always be used for redevelopment or new development on that property. This is just some pictures of redevelopment that have been taking place. This is for the Peoria tribes. This is just some redevelopment that's been taken on their property, and they are currently in the process, or it's in progress. And this was supposed, okay, this is a drone video that was taken on this property. Let me see if it will work. There we go, maybe. Drones have become very useful and are whenever we do site visits anymore, especially on big properties. And then this is for a property that's been abandoned, and you can use it for demolition. And of course, this is the Shine Arapahoe on the Concho School property, where they there were two buildings here and that were abandoned, and the demolition that took place here they used as part of a training for, I believe it was heavy equipment training, and then they're in the process of doing cleanup on these properties. And then the perception that once you have a contaminated property that it keeps it from being developed, and that's not always true. And then once we remove that perception that because of contamination, properties can be moved to a more productive use. This is just a picture of a warehouse. This is like in Tahlequah. There was an old lumber warehouse that was there, and it was demolished, and now it serves as the Cherokee Nation Peace Pavilion, where a pavilion was built, and they host different events under there. So that's just the perception of what was once contaminated and then redeveloped into something else. So what's the process? What's the redevelopment process? First, you want to identify the brownfields. You have to have, or it's very important that you set some kind of redevelopment goals. And once you identify that brownfields property, you want to assess it and investigate. And that's where the phase 1 and possibly a phase 2 will come into play. And what the phase 1 does, it's an environmental due diligence to see if there is a potential release prior to any development or redevelopment. And if there is any release, then that's when your phase 2 will come along, and sampling may be necessary. And if you find out that there is something there, then you have cleanup, and once everything is cleaned up, then you can move on to the redevelopment and the plan for sustainability. It sounds like an easy process, and it's nothing that happens overnight. Some of these can take up to 2, 3, 4 years. So it's a brownfields redevelopment project is something that you can't be in a hurry for, because it definitely takes time. So to identify a brownfields, you want to know, are environmental concerns a barrier to the redevelopment? Is there something there that's keeping the property from being redeveloped into something else? And you'll find out, is the current owner viable? Are they liable for continuing or ongoing? And then you want to find out, is that property suitable for redevelopment? Is it going to break economic needs, community needs, environmental needs? I mean, when you find out all this, you'll find out that it does meet the environmental needs, because it can do any of these, and it will be part of the identifying of brownfields. The phase 1 ESA definition. The intent of the report is to assess if current or historical properties have impacted the soil or groundwater beneath the property and may pose a threat to the environment or human health. So if there are issues found, it presents a potential liability for the lender or the owner, usually the owner, and it can also affect the value of the property. So the process of evaluating a property environmental condition is assessing the potential liability for any contamination. So I would say probably most of us that are, or those that are grantees for the Brownfields 128A or cleanup grant, must have, if you have an assessment grant, a phase 1 must be conducted that's in compliance with the AA final rule. And if there's the AA final rule, if it's something new that you've never heard of, it's the all appropriate inquiries. And this is taken straight from EPA website. And there it states that every phase 1 conducted with the EPA Brownfields assessment grant funds must be conducted in compliance with the AA final rule. So, and what we use is the ASTM 1527, and the ASTM 1527 is a tool so that you can be in compliance with AAI. It's not that you have to use 1527, but you have that option, or you can just follow along with the AAI rule. There is an exception for properties that are made of large undeveloped land, and you can use the ASTM 224716. I think the next slide goes on to, we'll talk about that a little bit more, the 224716. So phase 1 can be completed on all types of properties. We've done phase 1s on vacant lands, agricultural, commercial, industrial. We've done phase 1s on just about every kind of property. And then the ASTM, the 224716, is a standard that's used for properties that are primarily undeveloped land. I'm talking large undeveloped land. I think at one time, it may be on the next slide. No, I think I'll talk about it later on, but it had to be a certain, like 120 acres, but I think that they removed that standard, but it's a large area that's undeveloped land that you can use that standard. And I think that comes up a little bit more in my presentation. And we get a lot of calls from people of what is a phase 1. And people get confused, and it's not an environmental review. People say, we need an environmental review. Well, do you need an environmental review or environmental assessment? The ER, environmental review, is part of the NEPA. And what the NEPA does, it reviews a project that might determine environmental impacts. It reviews projects and environmental impacts to determine if it meets the federal, state, local environmental standards. And this is required for all HUD assisted projects. And any property and the property site will not have an adverse health effect on the end user. So there's two different things here. So we've got to be sure that we're not needing an ER, environmental review, that's for NEPA, because environmental phase 1 ESA is totally different from that. Let's see here, next slide. So this just goes on to about what a phase 1 ESA is. We talked about what it wasn't, that it was not environmental review. The phase 1 is a written document in a standard format, where you will do a site visit, what we call a site recon, where we will go out and observe the current and past conditions and the uses of the property and adjacent properties. We review the regulatory records from the federal, state, tribal, and local, and where you'll look at if there are any USTs, ASTs, any suspected release, any storage of hazardous disposal, hazardous waste, or anything. And we will also look at historical records, the historical records being aerial photographs, sandboard maps, building departments, permits, environmental liens, all kinds of historical records. And what's really helpful is the interviews you can with the current and past property owners, occupants, neighbors, government officials, or anyone familiar with the property. That's where you will find a lot of information that's not written. It's when you start interviewing with the people that live nearby or workers that are on the property. They can give you a lot of information that you won't be able to find in a library or in a book or somewhere. And we want to research the history of the property and the adjoining properties, where the current and past site and surrounding property uses that have had adverse effect on the property. And what they call is the big four resources. And you'll hear me refer to the big four later on. But the big four refers to the historical area photographs, historical topographic maps, the fire insurance or sandboard maps, and the city directory. And the new standards, that the 1527-21, it states that these resources, they have always been available, but we haven't always used them to the extent to look at the adjoining properties as we did the subject properties. And now the new standards are requiring, they're wanting you to look at the adjoining properties as much as you do with your subject property with these four resources here, or more if you have other resources. So who can perform a phase 1? They're performed by an environmental professional. And the environmental professional, the EP, they will identify the potential environmental risks of the property, where they will review the current and historic operations or anything that's or known that took place on the property, or anything that's suspected that may use or produce environmental substances or petroleum products. And the most common uses of concern that you will probably find are, of course, gas stations, dry cleaners, auto repairs, manufacturing. These are going to be the most common. And here we are talking about the 1527-21 to AAI. The 1527 is used as a guide to conduct and write phase 1s. That's what it is. I call it my phase 1 Bible. When I do my phase 1s, I have that standard right in front of me, and I refer to it several times as I'm doing the phase 1. The AAI, it was developed by EPA, and it's a process of evaluating a property's condition and assessing the potential liability for contamination. And this is just, it was published in the Register for back in 2005. The 1527, again, it's used as a tool to know what you're looking for when you're at a site recon and writing the report, because there's also a format available in there on how you can write the phase 1. And this is where EPA adopted. I should have changed that. Well, okay, I take that back. They adopted the 1527-13 standards for phase one, so you can use those standards because they do comply with AAI. The adoption for the 1527-21 is pending, and I don't know when they will be adopted, but you can still, if a phase one is conducted according to ASTM standards, it is accepted by EPA. So the 1521 standards are still pending for approval by EPA. So you could still use the 13. Just be sure that you reference it in your phase one, but you're using the 13 standards. In the news, the 1527-21, there has been a new appendix that provides guidance on how to distinguish between what a recognized environmental condition, a CREC, and an HREC. And there's also a flow chart, and it gives you examples of what's in there. And I can go over that here, the difference in that later. Oh, this is the 2247-16. This is it's very similar to the 1527-21. Excuse me. It originated in '86. It's a review of large rural forest land properties that were difficult and time consuming because it took so much time to go out and do a site recon. And they are the 2247 is AAI compliant, and it's just an alternative of the 1527 because for conducting forest land and rural properties. And 16, the standards updated the terminology consistent with the 27 standards. It gave a broader definition of what rural was, and of course EPA recognizes the forest land standard 2247 as compliant to AAI. Okay, the previous version of this, there it is, it defined a minimum property size of 120 acres. And the newer standard in 16, it removed that minimum property size restriction and it required the property just to be rural or forest land property of any size. There are some alternative sources for agency records that are allowed, and it gives a specific time limit of 20 calendar days for receipt of materials by the consultant for review and completing a phase one. So what it does, it provides an outside time limit and assures that the phase one will take at least 20 days to complete if requested. Documentation is not received earlier because there's probably going to be some extra site recon and some extra research that's going to be done. So it gives you a specific time limit of 20 days for a property that size. The 2247, it does allow for dependency on satellite or drone and aerial photography to inspect the property, especially to identify structures and potential areas of concern, especially when you can't access because the property is so big, and when you can't access the property, it allows you to view the property from nearby viewpoints. And some additional environmental records that you can use are the historical records, aerial and historical maps. You can use the mineral oil gas development maps and livestock dip and mat records. And your search distances must be from property boundaries. And these are some non-scope considerations that can be taken into account to the 2247. Your cultural and historic resources, you can include those as non-scope. Just be sure you mention it in your report. Your ecological and endangered species, those can be a non-scope consideration in the 2247. This is just a phase one that was done by Cherokee Nation, where we used the 2247 in conjunction with the just the phase one, and it was a property of 4,376 acres. And the drone was very useful because there were several areas where we couldn't reach or access because it was so wooded and because of the waterways, but the drone was very helpful. And there were several entry points where we could go in, and this is where I applied the 2247 standards. This is again a map, the area where it was done. This is in Sequoia County. These are just some pictures that were taken of the property from with our drone. Then it says, who can conduct a phase one? We talked about that it must be performed by an environmental professional or conducted under the supervision or responsible charge of the environmental professional. And here is the definition. A person must have sufficient specific education, training, and experience. So either that gives you of who can do a phase one. Again, this is their criteria on what an environmental professional is. The shelf life. There's been a lot of questions and back and forth on this, but the shelf life of a phase one is 1 year. However, if more than 1 year has lapsed from the report date prior to transfer or closing, a new report must be completed. However, you can do updates after 180 days, and updates are required. The updates, to do an update, you must do another site recon, a site inspection, review the historical records, and do your interviews again. And all this will take place after 180 days, which is about 6 months, and you can do an update. And then once your update is done after 6 months, you can do another one, but after 1 year, you must do a whole new phase one. So when do we want to do a phase one? Something that's applicable to tribes is when you acquire property, feed a trust acquisition. Department of Interior must establish liability protection before accepting title to property. They'll require you to do a phase one. Tribes receiving the EPA Brownfields assessment grants, you'll have to do phase ones. And when you're applying for EPA cleanup grants, and it's highly recommended that you do a phase one prior to any acquisition of property. And why the purpose of a phase one is to determine whether property may be contaminated prior to purchase or occupancy of a property that will be redeveloped. We'll gather enough sufficient information, and you will come up with a professional decision about the environmental condition. You'll identify the historical, current, or potential contamination and sources. And the purchaser or tenant has the option to complete a phase one to investigate the current historical uses of that property. So it's their decision. And identifying when you start a phase one, first thing that you want to do is you want to be able to get a legal description of the site. You start a phase one and say, okay, where do I start? Got all this information. Say, I have a phase one, I have a Brownfields, and I want to do a phase one. What you want to do is you want to get a legal description and a boundary map that shows the boundaries of the property. And these are the components of where we just identified it. That's where you'll do your boundary map, your legal description. You will do your records review, any previous reports that have been done on the property. There could be a previous phase one, any your historical research. You can order your data reports, or you can research yourself. And I'll put research. We purchase our EDR, we purchase our data reports because there's so much data in them, and then we have to pay for those. But if you don't pay for your data reports, it's a lot of research and it takes up a lot of time, which I think it's very well worth the money that you spend to get that research within a day or two, whereas it might take you a week or so or longer to come up with all the data that is in those reports. And then within, you will also do a site recon, which is a site visit, and your interviews. And within the new standards, the interviews are now classified and grouped into the standard historical resources instead of as one of the components. And I can explain that later also. The record review, where you will review the past and present of the subject property and adjoining properties to determine if further investigation is required. The EP will examine these records to show property transfer of ownership or liens of the property. You will look at the previous uses. You'll look at any industrial activities. You will look at the aerial photographs to see if there have been any changes or developments on the property and on the adjoining properties. So when you're doing a site recon, your site visit, you want to obtain information indicating the objective is to obtain information indicating the likelihood of identifying a recognized environmental condition in connection with the property. Your site visit will consist of walking through the property and seeing if you can identify anything. You'll go inside the buildings. You'll need to get access of the interior buildings that are on the property, and then you will look at the adjoining properties also. You will take pictures and take pictures and take pictures and take plenty of notes. You can never have too many pictures. And there are certain things that you want to look for in a site recon that are outlined in the standards. And after the assessment and the site recon, the phase one is going to be written to let the reader know of any recognized environmental conditions at the subject property and or any concerns that are on the subject property. You've heard me talk about recognized environmental condition, and this is a revised definition. The presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in or at any property, and due to the release of the environment or the likely presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products, all that, or the presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products. So this is a revised definition. And with your RECs, there are a scope, what they call the scope items, and there's a range of contaminants within the scope of the circulant and petroleum products. And if these contaminants are suspected, these are what we call the recognized environmental conditions, or RECs. But there may also be some environmental issues that are non-scope items, which you may want to, that parties may wish to access in connection with the property. They're outside the scope of practice. It could be substances that are present in quantities that may lead to contamination that are not included in the surplus definition of hazardous substances, or present circular liability. But in any case, they are beyond the scope of a phase one. So non-scope items are not required by ASTM 1527-21 to be looked at or included in your phase one. That is all up to your client or whoever you are doing your phase one for. Your vapor encroachment, it's now recognized as a migration pathway for contamination. It's a migration of vapors. You should include an assessment of real or potential occurrence of vapor migration or vapor release on the property. And the vapor encroachment screening can be found as there's a set of guidelines in the E2615. It's not required as part of the 1527-13. However, it does mention a migration pathway for vapor that is now recognized. So it's not saying, yes, you have to do vapor encroachment, but it does mention a migration pathway that could be applied to vapors. This is just a definition of migration. This is all taken from the standards. Records review, where we'll look at the purpose, the record sources, historical, environmental reports, and any documents important to the subject property. So the purpose of the record review is you're going to look at and review all the records that will help you identify any wreck or environmental concern. And my preference, I like to look at the records before doing a site recon so I will know what to look for. But it's your preference, your option. I've heard some say, well, that might give you a more biased opinion of what you're looking for, but I just like to be aware of what's out there and we'll have a better idea of what I'm looking for. But that is your personal preference if you want to look at the record reviews before or after you go look at the site. Okay, this is just some information from government agencies that are from the record research that's included or that you will be looking up. These are the distance where you will look at all the information. And all this is provided in your ASTM standards. And these are just a local list of what you might want to get locally from the city or county, building department records, fire department, planning division, enforcement division. They can provide you some very helpful information. These are just some standard historical sources that are used: aerial photographs, insurance maps, tax files, property tax files, land records, that would be your warranty deeds, any kind of maps, street directories, building department. These are just some sources that you can use to look up information. Some of the other sources that we use the EnviroFacts database, we use the EnviroMapper, and the Terrain Navigator. Sometimes you'll have to go to Oklahoma Corporation Commission for any petroleum. FEMA, we use the National Wetlands, the Web Soil Survey. These are just some that we do on our own. I mean, this is not, the list could go on and on, but these are just some that we use here for our phase ones. Historical information for the past owners. You'll look up the title history search of ownership, and you can find that at the county clerk's office. There are some that you can find online for the county records, but I think it only, depending on the county, it only goes back so many years. So, but they are available online. and you'll do interviews with past owners or adjacent property owners, and you want to find out the past uses or developments on the properties. Okay, vapor intrusion and encroachment. This is the difference in the definition, because there is a difference. The intrusion is where you will have vapors that intrude into an overlying building or into a building's interior space. Encroachment is the migration of any chemical vapor onto a property or near a property, not necessarily underneath or into, is where it just a vapor goes on. Now I will show you a diagram. This is the intrusion, where you have the vapors that actually just intrude into the building through the cracks or wherever it may be up into the building. Vapor encroachment is the migration of chemical vapors that will migrate onto a property or nearby, or they will just migrate and not necessarily up underneath through the cracks of a building. Again, this is where I say it's not within the scope of a phase one to evaluate the potential for a vapor to be present inside a building as a result of a release, which is vapor intrusion. But it is within the scope to identify the presence based on the pathway and how the contamination may migrate on the property. Sorry about that. Okay, and there is a vapor encroachment screening. The ASTM 2600, that's supposed to be 15, not 10, is another tool that you can use along with the 1527 that shows you how, gives you information about the vapor encroachment. It's you, like I said, it can use independently or as a guide, it can, or in conjunction with the 1527. It says the screening should be conducted by the be supervised by an environmental professional. So the ASTM, the 2600 standard, you can purchase for $78. It's recon, which we talked a little bit about. Is where you're going to obtain information indicating the likelihood of identifying a wreck. You will obtain information to identify findings and a wreck for the phase one. You will review records and review prior to the site recon. That's my preference. And it can help you in locating areas of concern where a wreck might be. And I like to do the research prior to the site visit. But that's just my preference. And these are some things that you would need to do a site recon. You want to be sure you have a camera, or you can use your phone. Take a notebook, pen or pencil, or if you're like me, I just take my notes on my phone. A measuring wheel to measure anything that might be like a foundation or something that are building. Property boundary map. I like to have a property boundary map so I can write my notes on what's nearby the property. And depending on the season, you want to take your tick repellent spray, dog repellent spray, and definitely a flashlight, especially if you're going to be in areas where there's no electricity, dark buildings, or where, but just be sure you're safe. These are some things you're going to look for when you're doing your site recon. You want to be sure visually and physically observe any structures on the building, adjacent, or any obstacles. If there's any obstacles where you can't get in the building that keeps you from getting access, you want to be sure and note that in your phase one also. You want to be sure and specify if you're going to look for any woods. Is it wooded? Is it vacant? Are there any developments? Is there a gas station? What kind of commercial property is nearby? Was it used for industrial or manufacturer? And what are the road paths? Are there any roads or paths that lead into the property from other boundaries? And you want to be sure and you put that in your phase one also. And these are just some things you're going to look for in your site recon. Any suspicious containers. You want to look for any stressed or stained vegetation. Take pictures of it. If it's due to just not enough water, you want to state that in your phase one. Any chemical waste, and these are just some common things that you will find. And odors. They've put something in the new standards that, let's say you're at a site and you don't find any drums or you don't have any odors. Well, what people tend to do is they just don't put that in there. Now what they're wanting you to do is say there were no drums, there were no odors, instead of just leaving it out. During the site recon, you want to note the current uses, whether if any places are unoccupied, any current uses that may involve treatment, storage, or generation of hazardous substances or petroleum, past uses of the property which can be found by doing interviews. And you want to find out the current and past uses between the properties and surrounding areas. And these are just some site recon you're going to look for. Is there potable water? Utilities, you want to find out if there are utilities, who provides the utilities, the sewage disposal, and what year it was installed. You want to note your topographic conditions because it'll help you determine the migration pathway. And you can find all this also from just looking at your maps, and that's provided in your data reports. Any structures or improvements on the property, you want to write down how many numbers of buildings and how many stores there are, and the approximate age of the buildings and square footage. A lot of times we aren't able to find out when the building was constructed or how long it's been there. So that's where your aerial maps will come and be a helpful tool. You can look at the different ages, different dates of the aerial maps, and you can get some guess of when that building was constructed, because it'll appear on 1 year and then maybe 5 or 10 years it's there again or it's not. So that's where aerial maps will come in handy. Your interviews is where you can get a lot of information, and your interviews should be asked in an attempt to get information about uses and condition of any current or historical information about the property. And this is who you may want to interview: your key site managers, former employees, occupants. And you want to identify the occupants and the duration of their occupancy. You want to make at least one reasonable attempt to contact the key site manager, which you shouldn't have any problems with that, but sometimes you may. Interviews, they will have a lot of information. These are just your interviews that you will have with your state and local government. This is just a list, which is, this is unlimited. Go on and on. Let's see. This is just an evaluation. Okay, the evaluation report. In your report, you'll describe all your services performed in detail. You will find in the findings section, it'll identify the known or suspect recognized environmental condition or historical. You'll include the EP's opinion of the impact on the property of conditions identified in the findings section. And you're going to provide your reason of why you why you came to that conclusion. And right here it says include the EP's rationale for concluding that condition or is not currently a recognized environmental condition. Conditions identified by the EP as regs currently shall be listed in the conclusions section of the report. And this is a table of contents report format that is included in the 1527.13. This is just what they recommend, but it's what you can use because it will provide all the information that is requested. Okay, that's all on that. I have almost 11 o'clock. Do we have any questions? No one? Oh, okay. Well, what was that question? Doreen, can you go back to that question?
I'm not seeing any questions.
I saw a question. I'm not seeing it. Doreen, can you pull up that question?
I don't see anything in the chat box.
Here we go. Okay. I'm curious where I can find training for phase 1 land assessment. I'm very interested and think it would be helpful for my tribe. Well, phase 1 training is very hard to come by. They're very far and few in between as far as doing a phase 1 assessment. I know that ASTM does their training, but they more or less are just going over the ASTM standards. So that would be very helpful. I mean, is finding out more of the standards, but as far as a phase 1, I'm not certain. Elizabeth, would you have any information on that?
No, I don't. I'm sorry about that. I have the similar question, so sorry.
Okay, maybe. But I will get your name. I have your name here. And if I find out some information, I will definitely get back with you on any phase 1 training. Okay. Do we have any more? Any more questions? Okay, okay, I see a question. Do you know of recent brownfield projects which have been completed on tribal trust properties in Oklahoma? Yes, we have done some, Cherokee Nation has done brownfield projects. Okay, let me take that back. Yes, I do. Absentee Shawnee, not absentee Shawnee. Yeah, absentee Shawnee. No, I'm sorry, Kickaboos. Darren Shields has some properties that was done on tribal trust land. And Shiner Up, they're the projects they're working on their Concho school that is on tribal trust land as well. Add me to the list for training. Okay, I sure will. I got you, Lincoln. Okay, what I can do is I will we can go over the new standards. See, let me find my other presentation. sharing. And okay. Let's see here. To get to play. Here we go. Okay. Drew may need your help. Here we go. Okay. I'm working on something.
It's not showing up just yet.
Okay. Y'all just bear with me. Hold on. Bear with me while I do this real quick. I had to go get some help. I'm trying to share this.
Okay, did you,
Where?
okay, go back, to-
Okay, y'all bear with me just for a moment.
go back to, move this over here.
This. Okay.
Oh, okay, go, stop sharing the one that you're sharing. Stop sharing.
Ah,
Okay, now go down here, share. And then share the one that you want to share, is that it?
yes.
Okay, share that one. And it should bring it up for you. And then go to slideshow.
Alrighty, we're going.
Can everybody see that slide?
Can everybody see that?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay, good, good. Okay. I had to get some help. I'm kind of rusty on this stuff. Okay, this is just a real quick revisions to the 1527-21. These were the highlight. There's like 11. The new definition of recognized environmental condition, consistent use. This is just everything that you will find that was revised. The thing about the 1527-21 standards, there's not really anything new or considered new. What they've done is they've just made the language easier to understand. And if you've been doing phase ones and been doing them correctly and you follow the standards, it shouldn't be anything new. But this is just a list of the changes. Okay, this is the biggest change. Of course, it's to improve the consistency and quality of the historical records review for the subject property and its adjoining properties. Like I said, there's more clarification of language, nothing has changed, and more clarity of what we should have been doing all along. And what does provide for more clear language. The revised definitions of a wreck, a control wreck, and historical wreck. So, where you can provide more clarity and consistent interpretations. This is the definition of a wreck in the 2013 standards. What they did was they took the word likely, instead of the presence or likely presence, they put the presence of hazardous substances and then made another sentence to it, the likely presence, and the same with the hazardous substances or let's see, likely present, or yeah. So that's been changed a little bit, but man, it's still the same thing. That I just changed it where it's more clear. The term property, I've seen this a lot for the term property. It's used interchangeably with property, site, subject property, and they're encouraging people to use subject property and not interchange it with subject property, site, so forth. That's just a recommendation, or they encourage you to use. The historical sources, let's see, the 2013, it says the EP is only required to review as many historical sources as needed to achieve the objectives of identifying whether past uses could have led to a wreck. Okay, that's the 13. The new standards requires the review of at least the big four. That's what I referred to earlier. The historical, aerial, topo, sandborne, and seated directories, provided they are reasonably ascertainable and likely to be useful, determining whether activities were conducted that would be expected to result in a release. That's the new, you have to review of at least the big four, and that's the big four right there. Okay. Let's see. Additional historical sources. They emphasize that providing as much specific information in the phase one about the use of the subject property. This is just so say. But you just be more specific of what it was used for. Like I said, it's nothing new. It's not anything new. It's just more specific of what you're looking for. Historical, a previous release of hazardous substance or petroleum products. Let's see. This is just telling you the definition of historical wreck. This is all included. And the new requires that the EP evaluate the past closure of a contaminated site and the environmental assessment data associated with the closure to confirm that the assessment meets the current standards for unrestricted use. I saw. Okay, I see a question over here. Do you hire or contract anyone to conduct phase one assessments on the Cherokee Nation side? We usually do the phase ones ourselves. We do have a big, large project that's coming up pretty soon, and that one it will be contracted out, but we usually do our phase ones ourselves. We do them in-house. And during the phase, do you say the property in Sequoia County, did y'all come across the 04 Smith Fort Gibson Military Road that runs diagonally across the property? No, we did not. No, we did not come across that road. Okay. Let's see. Okay, this is the guidance regarding the REC, HREC, and the CREC. A CREC is now defined in the new 2721 standard. affecting the subject property that has been addressed to the satisfaction of the applicable regulatory authority or authorities with hazardous substances or petroleum products allowed to remain in place subject to implementation of controls. That's a definition. The 2721 has an appendix that will clarify, that's intended to clarify what a REC, CREC, and HREC mean. It also contains examples of what constitute a REC. And what's also new to this is there has been a flow chart added as a tool in making a determination of whether property has a REC, HREC, or a CREC. And I will tell you up front, this is only a draft. Like I said, I don't have the 152721 standards. I haven't seen the real copy of it yet, but this is the draft that I was able to get from one of the webinars that I participated in. And there may be some changes to the final, I'm not certain, but this is the draft that was presented and what they were trying to come up with. But there will be a flow chart or REC chart similar to this that will let you know whether if a REC, CREC, or HREC is on your property. So I'm not saying this is what it looks like, but it will be very similar and it'll help you make a determination. Interviews. This is where I talked about well, they're now classified and grouped into one of the ASTM standard historical sources of information. They're not considered as a different component now. Emerging contaminants. Emerging contaminants are what's considered a non-scope. There it is. It indicates inclusion. There was a lot of concern about the PFAS and whether they were going to be identified as a REC or under the circular, but EPA has not listed the PFAS as listed under circular right now. Maybe in the future, I don't know. So the standard indicates the inclusion of such PFAS added to the phase 1 as a non-scope consideration. There was just a lot of discussion about whether PFAS is going to be a scope or non-scope item. So for the time being, it will still be considered a non-scope consideration. Significant data gaps. There was never a real definition in the previous standards. This was the definition. The 13. In the 21 standard, it says the lack of ability to obtain information required by this practice despite good faith efforts by the environmental professional to gather such information. So your significant data gap is there a big hole in all your inquiries and all your historical sources? Is there a big hole that keeps you from reaching a conclusion of whether if there's a REC or not a REC? Is that big hole keeping you from making that decision? If there is, and you don't have enough information to make that decision, that will be classified as the significant data gap. And this information needs to be addressed. If you have a significant data gap, be sure that it's included and addressed in the conclusion section. So that was a big thing in the new standard about significant data gaps. And this is just an example here. A building that's located on the property which is inaccessible during the site recon. Based on the EP's experience, such a building is one that involves activity that can lead to RECs. So the standard requires just a discussion of how significant data gaps affected the EP's ability to make that decision, to make a conclusion regarding RECs. So if you have a significant data gap that keeps you from making that decision, be sure that you just state it in your conclusion and why. What made you come to that conclusion? Oddly, the previous standards, they never specifically said that you to include photos or maps. I think mostly everybody just did. But the new standards, they make it clear that photographs and subject property with a map illustrating the boundaries shall be included in the phase ones, which, that only makes sense to me, but maybe some people didn't, but it was never required. It never said have pictures, have a boundary map, but now the 21 standards are saying they shall be included in the phase one ESA reports. The photographs, you want to include your major site features, location on the subject property that are considered regs, or some that are, or if you see things that are the minimus condition, when you want to take a picture of that, anything that might impact or is up there, you want to take a picture and note that in your photos. The 21, okay, this is the big thing that are required an expanded scope of historical research of adjoining properties. The EP will review each of the big four that have been reviewed for the subject property and adjoining properties. And if you weren't able to do that for the adjoining properties, you have to tell why. Why was it? Maybe you didn't have them, they weren't accessible, or there just wasn't anything there, or they weren't going to be useful. That information, you just got to state why. Research of additional sources may be needed, such as interviews, zoning. So when the EP is inadequately identified, that's a typo, historical uses based on the, you may have to go beyond the big four to find out the information, such as zoning maps, such as interviews. So you may have to look at other sources. So, but if one of these sources from the big four or whatever cannot be identified or reviewed, you just got to state why. Again, the shelf life, there was a lot of controversy, uncertainty of a shelf life, and the shelf life of a report is not the day that the report was completed or finalized. And there's 4 components of a shelf life. You have the date of the site visit, the day you did your interviews, the day of that you reviewed your records or you received your records, or your liens, or your activity use limitations. The date on each of these components need to be identified on the report, in the report. And the date of the earliest component of either your site visit, your interviews, your records, or your lien, the date of the earliest component is what you will use and when the clock starts ticking. If you got your site visit, that's the first thing you did, you will go 180 days from that date before an update is going to be due. After 6 months, an update is required. And after 1 year, a new phase will need to be done. Because there was a lot of confusion as to, okay, what date do I go by? Now they're saying it's the day that the earliest component was completed. The components that have a shelf life, again, are these. I think that's a repeat. Okay, and that's all. That's pretty much the gist of the changes to the 1527-21 standards. Like I said, I don't have a copy yet. I'm hoping to get mine soon. I didn't need to do this. Do we have any more questions? So I was looking. These are contact information. So if you come up with some questions later that you need to ask, about a phase one, or Brownfields question, or any standards, these are the people that you can contact. Myself, Chelsea Jones, Jason White, Karen Dye. So we are available. You can email us, you can call us. Just, we're available to you anytime, and we will help out and do whatever we can. Like I said, I'm still learning. I've been doing this for long enough, but I'm still learning stuff. So don't think any question is too easy or everyone knows this but me. Don't feel like that, because I'm still learning as well. So does anyone have any more questions or anything they want to mention or? No one? Wow. I know I wasn't that good. Well, if that, no one has any more questions or comments about anything, uh, please feel free to contact us at any time. We're always willing to help in any way we can. Doreen, can you unmute everybody?
Yes, I can.
So if anyone has any comments, Doreen has unmuted you. So if you want to make a comment or have any questions. Well, if not, I appreciate everyone. Like I said, I'm so sorry for the voice and sounding so raspy. I'm glad you were able to bear with me. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. And thank you all for participating. And if by chance, if anyone needs a certificate of that you participated in the webinar today, you can just send me send me an email and I can get that to you as well. Margaret, did you have something?
No, it's okay. I was gonna say something, but
You're
we're
free to
ending.
talk. You're free to talk.
I just wanted to mention that PPEs are also very important in doing site recons or site visits.
Yes.
Sometimes you come across those sites that have been vacant for a while and a lot of
Yes.
rusty nails, broken glass, and those sorts of things are
Yes.
laying around, or you have to go through rubble. Make
Right.
sure you wear steel-toed boots or some kind of boots to cover your legs. Long sleeve shirts, goggles, gloves. Those are all important and for safety measures. I think just to inform everybody that it's a good idea to protect yourself in doing these site recons.
Right.
And also in doing interviews, it's not always easy to find the right people to interview, especially buildings and properties that have been sitting for so long. There's no records, especially for pueblos in New Mexico. There are no records, no trail documents to go by.
Right.
I depend a lot on interviewing people,
Right.
but finding those right people has been a chore for
Right.
me. So, just to bring awareness that that can happen. And then in doing site recons, when you're looking around the property, sometimes you see ponding of liquids, like especially after a recent rain, ponding or little dips in the ground. There was something there, or there
Right.
is something there, either a septic tank or something's buried there in those areas when you start seeing ponding and
Right.
dips in the ground. So just wanted to add a little bit about what you said, but this was a very good training, Sheila.
Well,
Good
thank
job.
you. Thank you. Yeah, the thing about doing a site recon, uh, if something's not, if something doesn't look normal, it probably isn't.
Mhm.
If you see a dip or a discoloration or stress vegetation or something just doesn't look right, take a picture. You can go back and look at maybe some aerial photographs. And if you don't have aerial photographs, you can always, we use Google Earth. And that has like, it has like a timeline on there. And you can go back and look at the history of it. So you can get some idea. It might not be like, you know, everything, but you can get some idea of what's there. So there's different sources, and you just have to be, sometimes you have to get creative in doing this, um, and looking at your historical information, talking to people. So it's just all, it varies from site to site. I always say no site is the same. You're going to find a different way of doing things, how you did it, depending on the site. So,
Mhm. Right. And on the phase one trainings, I would recommend the ASTM training for anyone that's interested in learning because we follow the ASTM standards.
right.
So that would be the best training I would recommend. And it's really good and it's very interactive and people ask questions and then the time I took the training, there were people in the class that had a lot of experience. So they were asking questions, after they had done their first phase ones, asking questions about, I ran into this. Can you help me clarify? And those kind of questions in the classroom really helps. It really helps. Like first timers, you're just trying to learn. You don't know what to ask. You're not really experienced enough to know what questions you have until you've actually done a phase one. So I think that's the best training to have. And I was going to recommend if any of those on this call want to perhaps pitch in and get a class together, a training together, because I know all of us are on a budget constraint that we don't have money to afford to hire a contractor. But if you want to pitch in and put a training on, we can do that too.
True. Yeah, we could. And I was just going to say,
Margaret,
Yes.
this is Adam. If you need a host site, just let me know.
Okay. You have money?
Okay. I might. Might
Nobody
be able to
has
get you
money.
some juice.
That was weird. It was like
I
God
was gonna,
talking to me.
I was gonna say too that if you go to the ASTM website, they have a ASTM Resource Center, and that's where I was able to watch some webinars on the revised standards and changes. And there's a lot of information that you can find on the ASTM website also. They have their videos that you their past webinars you can go back and watch. So that's a very helpful site as well.
Yeah. Anyway, those are just a few comments I wanted
All
to
right.
make.
Thank you, Margaret.
Hmm.
Any other comments or questions? So I'm looking through here to see who all has a 128A and who may have done phase ones or currently doing phase ones. I see Krista's still on here. Krista, y'all do your own phase ones, correct?
For our Feed a Trust program, we do. But for
Okay.
our Brownfields or 128A, we usually contract those out.
Okay,
So, but I do have to review them and make sure that everything's done correctly. Hey.
right.
Um,
Okay. Well, if no one has any more questions or comments, I appreciate y'all. Like I said, if you need a certificate for this, just shoot me an email and we can get one over to you. And at any time you have any questions, I'm available as far as our staff. You can go to our website on the itechmembers.org and you can email any of us and we'll try to get back with you and answer the questions the best we can. So if that's all and no one has anything else, last call. Okay, well, thank you all very much for participating. And like I said, if you have any questions, just feel free to contact us at any time. And thank you all and have a good afternoon.